All right, guys. So what we're going to talk about today is the presidential election, which is going to be in a little more than a month from now. And it's pretty special because we only have a presidential election every 4 years. And we've only had 45 presidents. So if right now, do you know who the two candidates for president are?
Donald Trump.
Right, Donald Trump is the president now. He wants to be reelected. So he's president now. He wants to stay president another 4 years. Do you know who the other one is?
No.
All right, the other one's name is Joseph Biden. So they're really the only two candidates who have any chance of winning.
I never heard of them.
Winning the presidency. Okay, so the election day is going to be on the first. It's always the first Tuesday after November 1st. That was the rule that they made when they first started the country, and it's what's in the Constitution. And the reason it's the first Tuesday in November and not on a weekend or something, it's actually related to when, because it was mainly people who were farmers who were voting, so it was related to when the harvest was and basically how long it took people to get by horse and cart from the place where they lived into a city where they were able to vote. So that's basically, we still use that same system. So the rules about electing a president were made in the Constitution of the United States, which is like the rule book for the country. Lots of countries have constitutions. So our constitution is like the rule book for the country. The only way it can be changed is with something called an amendment, which is really hard to change. It's really hard to make. A lot more than half the country needs to want it for that to happen, and that's on purpose. They don't want people changing the Constitution every year just because of some trend or something like that. So they made it really hard. But there are some amendments to the Constitution that also affect the election as well. So the rules for the election depend on the Constitution and some amendments to the Constitution. The rules as we have them now is that the election's every 4 years. A president can only run, or someone can only run and win. You can only win the presidential election twice. Now, some people start out becoming president not because they won the election, but because they were vice president, and the president either died or had to quit. Then the vice president becomes president. The vice president is still allowed to run for president twice if he became president with less than 2 years out of the 4 years left on his term. So if you became president halfway through your vice president term, then you can serve out those 2 years of that, and then you can have 2 more terms. So that's 2 plus 4 plus 4. Do you know what that makes?
I know.
What?
10.
10. Yeah, very good, Ian. So 10 years is really the most that anybody can serve as president, no matter what. Now,
10 years?
10 years if you started out as vice president and you became president 2 years through your term. If the president died 1 year in and you became president and you had 3 years of that term, you could only run for election one more time, and then you would have 7 years. So it really doesn't come up. It's never come up that somebody ran for president a second time after being vice president. So most people are president for either 4 years or 8 years. And the other important thing to remember is that they don't simply let everybody in the country vote and then count up all the votes and decide who has the most votes. They use something, it's an indirect system. It's called the Electoral College. So when you vote, you don't vote directly for a president. You vote for someone in the Electoral College. And every state of the 50 states has their own electors. And different states have different numbers of electors for the Electoral College. So the bigger states with more people have more electors. That seems right, right? I mean, if there's more people in your state, they should have a bigger say in who gets to be president. But it is not even. It's not exactly even according to the population, which means that because of the Electoral College, some people's votes count for more than others. And the reason for that is that the way they determine the number of electors, they add up the number of senators in your state and the number of representatives in your state. Remember, those are the two houses of Congress that make laws, representatives and senators. Representatives are related to the number of people in the state, but senators are not. Every state has exactly 2 senators. So the way that works is that small states with fewer people actually get a bigger say. The reason for that is, look at the biggest state. It's California. They have 40 million people, and they get 55 votes. So they get the most votes of any state. Wyoming has 500,000 people. They get 3 votes because they have 1 representative and 2 senators. California has 53 representatives and 2 senators. Now it seems like, okay, California, they got 55. Wyoming has only 3, and Wyoming's much smaller. Well, that's fair. But if you look at it carefully, California has 80 times as many people as Wyoming. For every person in Wyoming, there are 80 people in California. But California only has about 20 times as many electors as Wyoming. So even though they have 80 times as many people, they have only 20 times as many votes in the Electoral College. So the way it works out is when it comes to electing a president, your vote in Wyoming, you could say it counts 4 times as much as someone in California. And people in California wouldn't be very happy about that. So the way it works in the Electoral College is that almost every state has a rule that whoever gets the most votes in that state gets all of the electors. So even if you got just more than half in California, they don't split those 55 votes. All of those 55 are going to go to one person. And what ends up happening with that is that some states, there's always a lot of people who vote for one side and less who vote for the other side. Those are called safe states. The people running for president don't pay them much attention because they can't change what's going to happen there. California, for many, many, many years, they've always voted Democrat. So why would anybody pay attention to that? It doesn't matter what you do. No Republican is likely to change their mind and make them vote Republican. The Democrat knows that. He's not going to worry about California either. There are other states that are called swing states. So they're usually 50-50. Sometimes they go to one party, sometimes they go to the other party, and the candidates pay them the most attention because when it goes 50-50, it's not like they split the votes even. If you can get just more than half, you're going to get all the votes from that state. And it is a big deal. There's 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, which split their electors, but they are pretty small states and it really doesn't change anything. The bigger states, it's all what's called winner takes all. So what can happen because of the Electoral College is that it's possible, and in fact it's happened twice in the last 20 years, that one person won more votes than the other, but the person who won the most votes of the people lost the election because the person who had less votes still had more votes in the Electoral College just because of the states that they won. So California has so many people, but even if you win all those 40 million people in California, all of their personal votes, you still can't get more than 55 electors. And you get a huge imbalance from the popular vote, the people voting, but that really doesn't translate. That really doesn't turn into more electoral votes. Let's look at this video and we'll see a little more about how the Electoral College works.
I thought it was electoral.
It's not Electrical College.
Electoral.
Electoral, because they are the electors. They are the people who elect.
Most people have heard of the Electoral College during presidential election years. But what exactly is the Electoral College? Simply said, it is a group of people appointed by each state who formally elect the President and Vice President of the United States. To understand how this process began and how it continues today, we can look at the Constitution of the United States. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution. It specifies how many electors each state is entitled to have. Since 1964, there have been 538 electors in each presidential election. How did they decide on the number 538? Well, the number of electors is equal to the total voting membership of the United States Congress, 435 representatives plus 100 senators and 3 electors from the District of Columbia. Essentially, the Democratic candidate and Republican candidate are each trying to add up the electors in every state so that they surpass 270 electoral votes, or just over half of 538 votes, and win the presidency. So how do states even get electoral votes? Each state receives a particular number of electors based on population size. The census is conducted every 10 years, so every time the census happens, states might gain or lose a few electoral votes. Let's say you're a voter in California, a state with 55 electoral votes. If your candidate wins in California, they get all 55 of the state's electoral votes. If your candidate loses, they get none. This is why many presidential candidates want to win states like Texas, Florida, and New York. If you currently add up the electoral votes of those 3 states, you would have 96 electoral votes. Even if a candidate won North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Vermont, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and West Virginia, they would only gain 31 electoral votes total from those 8 states. Here's where it can get a little tricky. On a rare occasion, like in the year 2000, someone can win the popular vote but fail to gain 270 electoral votes. This means that the winner may have won and collected their electoral votes by small margins, winning just enough states with just enough electoral votes, but the losing candidate may have captured large voter margins in the remaining states. If this is the case, the very large margins secured by the losing candidate in the other states would add up to over 50% of the ballots cast nationally. Therefore, the losing candidate may have gained more than 50% of the ballots cast by voters, but failed to gain 270 of the electoral votes. Some critics of the Electoral College argue the system gives an unfair advantage to states with large numbers of electoral votes. Think of it this way. It is possible for a candidate to not get a single person's vote, not one vote, in 39 states or the District of Columbia, yet be elected president by winning the popular vote in just 11 of these 12 states: California, New York, Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, New Jersey, North Carolina, Georgia, or Virginia. This is why both parties pay attention to these states. However, others argue that the Electoral College protects small states such as Rhode Island, Vermont, and New Hampshire, and even geographically large states with small populations like Alaska, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. That's because a candidate can't completely ignore small states because in a close election, every electoral vote counts. There are certain states that have a long history of voting for a particular party. These are known as safe states. For the past 4 election cycles, in 1996, 2000, 2004, and 2008, Democrats could count on states like Oregon, Maryland, Michigan, and Massachusetts, whereas the Republicans could count on states like Mississippi, Alabama, Kansas, and Idaho. States that are teetering between parties are called swing states. In the past 4 election cycles, Ohio and Florida have been swing states, twice providing electoral votes for a Democratic candidate and twice providing electoral votes for a Republican candidate.
Because there's 538 votes in the Electoral College, half of that is 269. They call 270 the magic number because if you get 270, you win. If both sides get 269 and there are ways that can happen, but it's never happened. But if two sides went, it gets decided by Congress who becomes president. That would be a huge disaster if that ever happens.
Oh.
But I don't think we really need to worry too much about that. So because we had this thing a couple of times recently where the person who won the most people's votes still lost the election, people on that side got very angry, and a lot of them say we should get rid of the Electoral College and just have what's called a popular vote. So that instead of having electors, everybody gets an equal vote. So if 55 million people in California vote for one person, then their votes count just as much as somebody in a swing state or somebody in a small state. You have to ask, why did the people who wrote the Constitution, what we call the Founding Fathers, why did they put in the Electoral College in the first place? The reason that they did it was they wanted to protect people. They wanted the states to have their own rights. So they wanted the United States not just to be one country where everybody was the same, but they saw different parts of the country, different states, as having their own interests. They did not want groups of people in one part of the country where there were more people, like Washington, D.C. or New York City, to basically be the only ones who were deciding who the president was. They thought that might lead the other areas, the smaller states, to want to break away because they really didn't have any voice in the government at all. And people tend to see this as sort of one state against another, but the reality is, what it's come to is that it's really city versus countryside. So in general, right now, the cities tend to vote for the Democrats, and the countryside people outside of the central of the cities tend to vote more for the Republicans. We'll talk about that more when we talk about the two political parties, but it's really not a state versus state thing. It's city versus countryside. And the states where most of the population is in big cities, like California and New York, and Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, they tend to go for the Democrats every year. But in states where there are very little in the way of big cities, like the South, like Alabama or Louisiana, or the West, like Arizona, they tend to go more for the Republicans. So whether, everybody says their own system is fair. There's no one right answer. The people who like the Electoral College think that is more fair to the people who live outside of the major cities. A popular vote would be unfair because it would totally focus, the candidates would only focus on what was good for the major cities. People who want a popular vote just say it's unfair that if you live in the country or in a small state, your vote counts for more than if you live in a big state with a lot of big cities. So let's talk a little bit about the parties, the political parties. Do you guys know what a political party is? Is it anything like a birthday party?
No.
Where everybody eats cake?
No.
So what's a political party?
They just call it a party.
Right.
Like the Boston Tea Party. It's not really a tea party.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit different. But what a political party means, they're not talking about a party like a celebration. They're talking about a party like a group of people who all have the same desires for what they want their country to do and the kind of laws that they want in their country. Now, there's no limit on the number of political parties that you can have. So there's no rule saying that you can only have two political parties, but the way that it has turned out since this country began is that there have always been two dominant political parties. And the ones that we have now, the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, have been the two dominant political parties since before the Civil War. So basically for more than 150 years, and that's a long time. It started out at the beginning of the country that you didn't cast separate votes for president and vice president. Everybody just cast votes for president. The person who came in first place became president. The person who came in second place in the votes became vice president. Can you think of a problem with that system?
What happened to the third?
Well, the third didn't get anything. So that wasn't the problem.
Oh, or maybe the vice president was angry and he might kill the...
Well, they wouldn't kill, but they wouldn't work together, right? Think about it. When you have two parties, right? You have one person won, and he's going to have one vision for the country and the way that all the laws should go and the way that things should go for the next 4 years. The second one is going to be the main person against him. They're supposed to work together, but how can you work with a person who thinks exactly opposite? So they found out pretty quick that wasn't going to work. So now instead of doing it that way, where the person who gets the second most votes, they vote something called a ticket. You don't just vote for a president, you vote for the president and the vice president together. So every party has a slate, which means, or a ticket. It means a president and a vice president. You can't just vote for one or the other. You vote for them together. So when the president gets elected, he has his own vice president that he personally picked that's on his side. So when you vote for a Republican president, you're voting for the Republican president and the Republican vice president. When you vote for the Democrat president, you get the Democrat president and the Democrat vice president. Now, why does it turn out that there's really only two parties? Why can't there be more in our country? Well, basically, the way it works is because it's a winner-take-all system. And when you have more than two parties, inevitably the ones that are stronger will be made stronger and stronger, because by winning, they get stronger. They're able to make rules that make their own party stronger. And people just over time get used to there being two parties. And when, even though there are third parties and fourth parties, what they call, the smaller political parties, people feel like if they vote for those parties, they're really just throwing away their vote because they don't have a chance. So there might be another party like the Libertarian Party or the Green Party. Those parties exist. You could vote for a Libertarian or Green president, and you might agree with them more than your own party. I might say, well, I like the Libertarian candidate more than the Republican candidate, but the problem is if I vote for the Libertarian, he's never going to win. Then I miss my chance to vote for the Republican. I give the Democrat more chance to win. And I really hate the Democrat. And the Democrat might say, well, I really like the Green Party candidate. I don't want to vote for him because it's like I'm throwing away my vote on someone who has no chance. And I'd rather just vote for the Democrat, even though it's not my perfect choice, because I really don't want the Republican to win. You understand? Yes. So the other thing is that in order to win elections, you know what you need to have a lot of to win an election?
People.
But how do you get the people? How do you get the voters? What do you need? A lot. You need a lot of money. Why do you need so much money? Because you need to buy advertising, right? Look at burger chains, right? What burger restaurants have you guys heard of?
Burger King.
All right, and what other one? What's the other big burger chain? McDonald's, yes. So you've heard of Burger King and McDonald's. Did you know those are not the only burger chains out there? How come you know about Burger King and McDonald's? Because you've been there, but why do you guys want to go there? Why don't you want to go to one of the others? Because of advertising. You see commercials and stuff, that makes you think they're better. And unfortunately, a lot of people decide who they're going to vote for, not because they really understand clearly how those parties are different and how those presidents are going to affect their lives, but because who makes the right advertisements and who makes the advertisements that are most convincing to them, and they vote for someone that makes them feel comfortable, which is the person who they've seen on TV. In order to get that money, you have to be part of a party. Because if you are not part of a party, if you're like, I'm going to run for president, but I am independent, I'm not part of any party, no one is going to give you any money, you are not going to be able to buy any advertisement, and even if you can get your name on that form, no one is going to vote for you because they've never heard of you. Nobody is making the effort to go and look and read exactly what the candidates are going to do. They're just waiting for commercials. They're waiting to hear what other people say, their friends, their relatives, people on TV, but they're not really making the effort to collect the information so they can really make an intelligent, informed decision about what is best for them. And this is why we have these talks, because when you guys get old enough to vote, I don't want you to listen to advertisements to decide who to vote for. I want you guys to have the tools to know what issues are and what you think is the right policy, the right laws that should be made about those issues, and how to figure out which candidate fits the way you see the world and vote for whoever you see fit.
I won't be voting until 10 years.
Right, 10 years, but there's no reason not to get started on things now. Because when you guys are a little older,
elected, we can kiss goodbye to the economy that we've been enjoying. He's going to raise taxes. He's already said that.
This is an ad against Joe Biden. This is an advertisement for Donald Trump. Some people just believe whatever they see on those advertisements, and that's how they vote.
Yeah, like this kind of advertisement.
But since I don't vote, I don't care about those commercials.
Okay, but I want you to start now. You're 8 years old. It's time for you to start listening and understanding. In a few years, you're not going to want to listen to me anymore. So now is when you still think I know something and you're still willing to listen to me. That's why we start now.
Democracy, the greatest form of government, and we have two choices for who's our leader. In fascism, you only have one choice. That's great. We have one more choice than the worst form of government. It's often assumed that America is the land of freedom, the land of true democracy, but that's just not quite the truth, is it? Our democracy looks more and more like a duocracy, in that only two groups of people really have any voice in the direction of our government, the Democrats and the Republicans. We all know our government is broken. We all know that the elections are unfair and don't really reflect the views of the 300 million people living here. But the question is, how did we get here? Why does our country only have two parties? Why not 3 or 4 or 5? Well, in fact, our country does have more than two parties, but they have no voice, no say, no power. Since 1852, we have either elected a Republican or Democratic president. And before that, it was either the Democrats or the Whigs, and before that, either the Democrats or the National Republican Party. The point, America has been a two-party system for a long time. In the beginning, it wasn't quite like this. In fact, in the first election, there were no political parties, and most of the founding fathers argued against them. John Adams even said that there is nothing which I dread so much as a division of the republic into two great parties, each arranged under its leader in concerting measures in opposition to each other. This, in my humble apprehension, is to be dreaded as the greatest political evil under our Constitution. But nevertheless, by the time George Washington left office in 1797, the country split into two parties, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. So what's been happening to cause this two-party system to emerge? Well, the fact is that in 48 out of 50 of our states, our election is a single winner voter system, aka winner takes all. For example, when Ross Perot ran in the 1992 election against Bill Clinton and George Bush, he got 19% of the popular vote, but didn't get any votes from the Electoral College. Instead, Bill Clinton, who won only 43% of the popular vote, beat Bush and Perot by winning 32 out of the 50 states, thus earning more Electoral College votes, and he took the presidential seat. The theory is that this form of voting leads to a two-party system because of something called Duverger's Law. This law basically says that third parties can't compete because there is no prize for winning. Voters who might have agreed with Perot more might have been afraid that if they had voted for him, it would take away votes from Clinton, and thus voted for Clinton in the hopes that Bush wouldn't be elected even though they agreed with Perot more. In short, people feel their vote for a smaller party is ineffective, and so weaker parties are eliminated over time, a process known as polarization. Why is this two-party system a problem? Glad you asked. Well, some say our two-party system is unjust and has led to modern crises such as banks too big to fail, the decline of the middle class, rising costs in healthcare, etc. Their arguments suggest that our two-party system has limited our choices, our thinking, and has corrupted our media and our politicians. So then, what's the fix? That's a great question. Some political scientists suggest using a party proportional representation system rather than a winner-takes-all voting system. That means if a minor party gets 15% of the votes, then that party will win 15% of seats in the legislature. Many countries around the world use this system, such as Japan, Sweden, Argentina, etc., and while it's not perfect, it would probably make the voters of the US at least feel a little bit more empowered.
So what he's talking about is the system that's used in a lot of other countries, like for example in Europe. So instead of having one party running the government all by themselves, they have what's called a legislator, a parliamentary system with proportional representation. So if you win 40% and the other group wins 60%, it doesn't mean that the winner takes everything. It means that you still get 40% of the voting power, and that makes it much easier for them to have more than one party. But the United States has had the system we have now for almost 250 years. So I think it's pretty unlikely that we're going to change. So basically we have the two parties, Republicans and Democrats. In order to what are the major differences between Republican Party and Democrat Party? Well, in general, Republican Party is supposed to believe in smaller government. They believe that the government is just there for essential services, like having an army, defending the country, but that for almost everything else possible, the states should take care of it, or people should take care of themselves. They want the government to be as small as possible, which means the taxes which fund the government should be as small as possible. The Democrats in general feel that government has a bigger role. Government should do more to take care of people who are poorer and should have more services, provide them things like money when they can't make money on their own, provide them with ways to get food when they can't get food on their own, and all kinds of things like that, which means government has to be bigger, and taxes, in other words, the money they take out of everybody's pay to fund the government, will have to be higher. Now, it doesn't always work out exactly like that, but that's the general difference. There's a lot of other differences on different kinds of policies, things like guns and the way that we deal with other countries and pollution and things like that. But that is really like the major difference. At some point, people kind of have to decide what their sort of feeling is in terms of how big government should be and how much you as a person want to give out of the money you make to help other people who don't have as much, and whether you think those people don't have as much because the country is unfair, or because those people simply didn't try as hard as you did to have enough money. So people feel different ways about that, and that's often reflected in the way that they vote. Do you guys have any questions about how we elect a president?
No questions.
Yeah, what's your question, Ian?
So you mean that when they had those popular elections, like the ticket,
Yeah.
does the vice president get happy and work together?
Yes, because they work together. The president picks his vice president for the ticket. or the candidate picks his vice president. So, as a general rule, the vice president knows that he has to do whatever the president says. He's kind of like works for the president. So it's very, very unusual for the vice president, because the vice president wants to be president someday himself a lot of the time. He knows if he's a good vice president and he doesn't create any problems, then the party has a better chance of wanting to make him the presidential candidate the next time around. So yeah, presidents and vice presidents will typically work well. Vice presidents will typically not take any positions that are against what their president is saying, okay? All right, that's it.
Bye.
The presidential elections, United States.